It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Well, hello, Irwin. I figured I would return to a little sing-song for you because I think you were disappointed
I,
the
I,
last time I didn't.
that is something I really do look forward to after 111 podcasts with you, to have a little bit of
But who's
that.
counting?
Exactly. Now, Esperanza, as you know, and as has been mentioned periodically on Our Hamptons podcast, I am president of East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, an organization I love, a job I love doing. Amazingly, they haven't fired me yet or voted me out. I can't believe it. But anyway, while I may be the president of this organization, our incredibly special guest this morning is the brand of East Hampton Trails Preservation Society. This guy goes back with this organization virtually to the beginning, and he's going to tell us all about that. But Esperanza, boy, this is some buildup, but I'm telling you, the guy deserves it. He not only has he been there from the beginning, this guy is literally, Esperanza, he's designed some of our trails. He's built some of our trails, and he's going to tell us how he did all of this. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Rick Whalen, who, if I give him his technical term, he's the Vice President of Trails Planning for East Hampton Trails Preservation Society. But he's a lot more than that, and we're going to talk about that. Rick, welcome.
Yes, good morning, Irwin. Good morning, Esperanza.
Welcome, Rick.
Yeah, we're really excited to
Great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to Rick about this. And this is, Esperanza, this has been on my mind to do this podcast, as I mentioned to you, for a while. But I sometimes was a little bit hesitant to muddy the waters. Well, this is sort of a separate thing I do from East Hampton Trail. But honestly, East Hampton Trails Preservation Society has been around since 1980, and it's really an essential element, as far as I'm concerned, of the town of East Hampton and beyond. I mean, it's an important organization, but I want to bring Rick in here. Now, Rick, you're not a Bonacker. Now, neither am I, and neither is Esperanza. And better yet, Esperanza, Rick knows I grew up in Queens, New York. Rick is from the Bronx, so he also had a path here. So, Rick, you were born in the Bronx. Just give us, before we delve deeper into East Hampton Trails, how did all of this evolve? I mean, tell us about you. You were brought up in the Bronx. Were you an outdoorsman as a young boy growing up in an urban environment? Give us a little insight into you.
So I grew up in a walk-up apartment building. We were on the fourth floor, 196th Street in the Bronx, which is just west of the Grand Concourse. My mother, my father, and I have three brothers who are younger than me who are identical triplets.
Wow.
And they all basically live out here at least part of the time. Two of them, well, all three of them actually own houses in Montauk, although two of them share one house. So, when we were kids, we would sometimes get out of the Bronx, but not we didn't go on like family camping trips or stuff and things like that. But we would go to like the Croton Dam, and the summertime, as we spent some time, we would go to a place called Ball Pond in Connecticut. And I have to admit that even very early on, I recognized I liked getting out of the city. So, I guess I sort of had a kind of innate interest in the outdoors from an early stage, even though I lived in a very urban environment.
Right. And you mentioned to me when we spoke the other day, and look, I know Rick, we've known each other for years, but were you familiar with the East End of Long Island before you moved out here?
Not at all. Nope.
Because you mentioned.
That's how I was, wondering what brought you out here. And
most people who would be out here have come out here, settled out here, whatever. Maybe their parents had a summer house or something.
Right.
Right.
That's not the case. So my story goes back to the summer of the summer of 76. All
Ah,
right. Which is, believe it or not, 50 years ago, we had a different national birthday going on that year. That was the bicentennial,
Right.
right? And I was between my first and second years in college, and I was spending the summer living with my grandmother in an apartment that she was up in a little bit further north in the Bronx, and commuting. Well, I'll call it commuting to a job at a McDonald's restaurant on the off the Grand, no, Fordham Road, so it wasn't on the Grand
I
Concourse.
love this story. God.
So in August of that year, my parents and another couple who were longtime friends of theirs rented a house at Ditch Plains in Montauk
Oh, God.
for 2 weeks. I came out for only one of the weeks and spent the week out there. It's funny because it later turned out when I was working for the town that one of the people in the planning department, Jody Angelo, her aunt, I think it was, owned the house.
Oh, my
the
gosh.
house. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
She
Well,
offered to
that's what
give me a
6 degrees
backpack one
here.
day because we were going camp or a tent or something. We were doing for a camping trip or something. And she said, well, you go to my grandmother's house, my aunt's house. Maybe it was her grandmother. I'm not sure. And she describes it to me. And I said, wait a second. Isn't that the Thurston house? So there was actually a later connection. But anyway, I'm jumping ahead. So I came out for 1 week. And before I went back to college, I returned to the McDonald's restaurant for like another week or so because there's still a week to go. And I distinctly remember being in the McDonald's at the time thinking, what am I doing
What am I
here?
doing here?
That
Let's
is
go out there. and I won't get into the details of because I was going to college at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I had to take but bottom line is, I found a job and a place to stay, a room with kitchen privileges, as they used to call it. And I had to take a long bus and train trip from Bethlehem to East Hampton and back in one day.
Oh, my gosh.
Meet my prospective landlord, show up at the place I was looking for a job, which was the East Hampton Movie Theater, East Hampton Cinema. And I remember a lot of that very distinctly. But that's how so I came out then for the full time, if you will, in the summer of 1977.
Wow.
And even though you can't really say that I saw, that I lived in East Hampton for the next 2 years, when I would have breaks from school, winter break, spring break, whatever, I would stop by my family's, apartment in the Bronx to say hi, whatever, spend a night or two there. And I would come out to East Hampton because the place the woman's house I was staying, she would let me come out even in the off season. And so from that point on, and then when I graduated from college from Lehigh in 1979, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I had made up my mind that it was more important to me where I lived than what I did.
Mhm.
And so I came out here. And so that was probably end of May of 1979.
Wow.
And from that point forward, other than when I went to law school down in Virginia for 3 years in the mid 80s, I've lived here.
Wow.
Incredible. Yeah.
Great. That,
Well,
and
but
I didn't own my own house until 2006. Until that time, I was a renter.
such a great story, Esperanza. And what I really loved about what Rick said was, and it's so true, like most people from away, it's okay, my parents had a house here or my uncle had a house here. It was almost random in a lot of ways that how this whole thing happened. His parents just happened to rent this place in Ditch Plains, and obviously it spoke to Rick.
The key thing is when I came out here, I fell in love with the area very quickly. At first, when I came out, it was like a beach, summer beach place. That'd be a
Right.
great place to hang, be in the summertime. But within, a year or so, I basically discovered that there were woods out here and then there were trails. And it was a rural area. There was a lot of farmland back then, more farmland than we have today, unfortunately.
Yes.
And less ticks.
Yeah, I didn't really didn't focus on ticks too much back in those days. I remember the early 1980s. I'd hiked in Indian Field. I remember coming back. I was renting in a place on Accabonac Highway, another room with kitchen privileges deal, and was picking ticks off me in the bathroom afterwards. Like, didn't think too
But they
much
were
of it.
bigger then, maybe.
Yeah, they're
But
probably dog ticks.
I have to say it's very, I was just very little girl, but my family, it was very similar story, and the same year, same summer of 76. and a similar experience in that regard where it was just like, we love this place,
Yeah.
and then ended up staying.
You
And
know,
so
yeah.
I can completely relate to your
Yeah, it was
own
the whole,
experience.
look, East Hampton, especially then, obviously things have changed a bit.
Exactly. I wanted
You
you to
know,
talk about
this
that.
was, farmers and fishermen and rural character and, beauty and all that stuff. And
Yeah,
it definitely,
it was very real, very
Yep.
real.
Yeah, but I really love the way Rick you just shared that experience. Like, said this to you, Esperanza, on a few occasions. We all have those kind of stories, and Rick, yours was a great one. The illustration of the working at that McDonald's and just great, and saying, "What am I doing here?" I love that, but. This episode is about East Hampton Trail. So, Rick, being your love for the woods, and you got out here, as you said, when you were really a very young guy, did you get involved with East Hampton Trails? Now, the official starting date of East Hampton Trails Preservation Society was around 1980, if you want to say officially. But it might have been maybe there was activity a little before or whatever. Were you involved with it right from the beginning?
Almost, but not quite. So, according to Lee, who says there was an organizational meeting in 1980, and I
And that's
believe that,
Lee Dion you're talking
That's
about,
yeah,
right.
right?
Lee Dion, I should say Lee Dion, who was the first president of the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, and deserves a great deal of credit for the existence of the, East Hampton Trails Preservation Society,
And still involved to this
and
day.
is still involved.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, he premiered his, short film, which was quite good on the history at LTB last
That's
year.
right.
Did a very good job on that too.
Yeah.
So I believe the original meeting, and Lee would have to confirm this, was held at the home of Hale Allen on Further Lane. Who remembers Hale? I never met the man.
No.
I never knew him. He had a house on the ocean, I believe, because I looked this up. I think it was 364 Further Lane. I knew it was at the eastern end of Further Lane, but on the ocean. And it looks like the house was what's now 364 Further Lane. And I believe that Hal Allen was a horseman. We had horses. And you have to remember the early and Lee Dion had horses too. He was a horseback rider. So really the origin of the Trail Society came primarily with horseback riders, and that has to be borne in mind.
Hmm.
So there was then a I don't know what you call it, a second organizational meeting. I don't know what happened between 1980 and 1982. But in 1982, there was another. Now, this is a meeting I attended. I thought for years that this was the original organizational meeting, but obviously Lee says there was one in 1980. In 1982, we had a meeting at the home of Maggie Kotuk on Hands Creek Road. I don't have the address of that one, but I know where the house. When you turn off Cedar Street and you start up Hands Creek Road, it was not too far up on the left. It was before you would get to Longhouse, right? And I remember meeting in there was like a great room or something like that. I'm sure Lee was there. Maggie was there. Maggie Kotuk was a horseback rider. She later owned a farm, a horse farm off Middle Highway, owned that for many, many years.
Oh,
And then
yes,
she
yes.
relocated down to Florida. And I think she still has one or two of her kids still live in the area up here. I mean, so the other people I know were at that meeting were John and Diana Zadarla. They were also horse people. And in fact, our logo with the horseback rider in the woods and the hiker, okay, that's Diana Zadarla's artwork.
Wow.
That's where it came from, Diana Zadarla. So John became the president after Lee. I don't know exactly when. I don't know if that happened in 1982. It might have. But John Zadarla was the second president of the Trail Society. So from 1982, I was involved.
Wow.
You know,
Now, Rick, this organization started, we're going to call it the early 80s, but so within the woods, were there existing trails that were already built? Like, were they numerous?
So,
Who was responsible for building them before the existence of this organization?
Very good question. So I remember one of my first times on the trails. I used to do a lot. I used to road run back in those days. I don't do that so much now. If I run now, it's on the trails mostly. But I did a long run up into Northwest. I remember going up Two Hills of Water Road. In any event, eventually I wound up going into trail. When you go in Chatfield's Hole, the trail that goes, off the east side of Two Hills of Water Road, which is now part of the Foster's Path. I remember, I don't remember whether it was running on it or hiking it. I think I was running. And I remember going on that trail. And that was before the houses on either side of the trail were there.
Mm,
Okay, those subdivisions were early 1980s. So what you had back at that time, this is pre until about 1988, you had woods roads. All the trails were so-called woods roads. What do I mean by that? They were all what we call double track, meaning they were basically two tire tracks. They were all created probably originally by wagons and horses and carts and wagons, and many of them were still being used by people on with four-wheel drives. We hadn't created any trails yet. So the first trail that the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society were to open, what I call a greenbelt trail because it linked multiple properties. It wasn't just within one park, was the Northwest Path.
mm.
I designed the Northwest Path. And I'll tell you how I did it. So first of all, I went to law school from 1984 to 1987.
And you took a class in law school that taught you how to design trails. Is that what you're going to tell us now? Okay.
No, did not do that. Well, I went to law school down in Washington and Lee University School of Law, Lexington, Virginia, a beautiful place. I loved it. I loved law school. I loved that area. It's a beautiful area. If I didn't come back up here, I guess I would be living down there. Um, so in the fall of 1987, um, I got a job. I took a job at a law firm in New York City called Side Paget Russell. And my plan had been to, work for them for a year or two. I was actually living with my parents on Bronxville Road in Yonkers at the time, and I was commuting down there on the Westchester Express bus. Now, as it turned out, I only wound up working for them for that fall because what happened was that Fred Thiel, who was then working as the zoning attorney for George Biondo in Montauk, ran for and won. I think he won. I guess it was the county legislature, I believe, in that November's election. And so he was leaving George's office. George needed a zoning attorney. I'd been involved in zoning stuff before I was a lawyer because I was involved in all the kind of environmental causes out here. Obviously, the Coalition for Hither Woods, preservation of the Northwest Alliance and stuff like that. So anyway, I made contact with George. He offered me the job, and I only spent 4 months beside Patrick.
Wow.
Which is too bad because actually I enjoyed those 4 months. I learned a lot in 4 months, but I felt kind of bad. But I wanted to come back out here. So anyway, I'm jumping. So the relevance of this is I would come out on weekends when I was working that fall in the city, and on the Westchester Express bus going into Manhattan on Monday mornings, I would be thinking over where I had explored the previous weekend because I was reconnoitering the route for the Northwest Path. And what made it possible, first of all, the town, and I'd become aware of this, the town owned a 52-acre property it obtained as like a fire parcel or something like that back in the 1950s. That's between Route 114 and Two Holes of Water Road. That's where the Northwest Path begins. That property was crucial. Then the town, of course, owned the Chatfield Hole Preserve. They acquired that in 1976. And then by the time I was already involved in this, in 1985, the town had acquired the Grace Estate. And the Grace Estate then essentially abutted Cedar Point County Park. So there was a potential route. The key to the route, and I'll come back to this in a moment, was property owned by Marilyn Wilson, who owned 45 acres of land east of Bull Path and joining Old Northwest Road and essentially connecting to the Grace Estate. So anyway, bottom line is I would be out on the weekends in the fall of 1987, kind of, reconnoitering, and I would be like going in on the bus on Monday morning. I'd be like thinking about, where the trails, because I'd have it in my mind where we've been. So that was how that was designed. And that trail, the Northwest Path, was opened not just by me. There were other people involved. Mike Bottini, his girlfriend at the time, Judy Cooper. I forget the other people, but Mike and Judy were key participants. Probably Tom Rule too, I believe. So we designed and opened that in the winter of 1988-89. And the inaugural hike, I think, was in February 1989. That was the first single track trail, meaning, because we weren't creating woods roads at that point. We didn't want to need to drive on them. So we didn't use power tools. We had these weed whackers. That's how we removed the understory.
We have to just stop you for a second, Rick, because this is this is some of the most fascinating information I've heard in really a long time. Because if you could put a grasp on this, Esperanza, imagine going into virgin woods. Okay, and this is almost like what I talk about when we talk about Longhouse, how Jack Leonard Larson took a 16-acre potato farm that was flat as a pancake and created what he did. Rick, Mike Bettini, whomever else, went in, and I really want to emphasize this point because Rick is probably being modest here, but they went into virgin woods and conceptualized a trails network and system. This is extraordinary.
That's what I'm curious is what goes into planning that, because yes, you reconnoiter. How do you do that? Places that are like focal points and that you want to transit through. I mean, I'm just very curious.
Right, before you can design the trail, lay out the trail, open the trail, you have to know the area pretty intimately. You go through usually multiple times, look at the terrain. And by the way, I'm going to point out too that, and Mike knows this, Mike Bettini knows, I made some mistakes in the trail design at the time because, first of all, at that time, 1987-88, when the design was going on, we didn't have mountain bikes. Mountain bikes were just about arriving on the East End at that time. So there was no thought. It was just thought of as a hiking trail. And some of the slopes that we traversed were too steep. In the years since, we have made some corrections and adjustments to that original route, generally in places where the slopes, were really too steep for a trail, and didn't hold up. But that's, I went through, reconnoitered the area, and then I would come back and, flag it, put up tape for the route, and then eventually a bunch of people from the Trails Preservation I cleared it. And as I said, in those days, we weren't using any machine tools, all hand tools.
Yeah, and remember, Esperanza, they're clearing literally miles of woods with hand tools. I mean, this is not just going.
How long is that trail that you described from 114 through to almost Cedar Point Park, I guess?
We go into Cedar Point Park in a different place today, but we went into Cedar Point Park. In other words, we crossed over L.Y. Brook Road, even with the original route, although it went to the north and ran alongside L.Y. Brook. Whereas today it goes to the right, goes around L.Y. Brook on the right-hand side, and then goes into Cedar Point Park and goes out to Hedges Banks. One other person I have to mention, though, in a crucial part of doing this. So almost all of the land necessary for the trail was in public ownership by 1987 because of the Grace Estate purchase. But there was one key that wasn't, and that was the 45 acres that Marilyn Wilson owned. So I didn't know Marilyn Wilson personally, but I knew that she had been a past president of local chapter of the Nature Conservancy. So I knew that environmentally, where her heart was. And I arranged to meet her. Remember, I was spending, in the fall of 87, I was at Cy Paget Roselle in Manhattan during the days. So I arranged to meet, Marilyn Wilson had a house in Brooklyn Heights. So I made contact with her and I arranged, I guess, after work one day to take the subway over from Manhattan over to Brooklyn. First time I'd been in that area. And I met her at her house in Brooklyn Heights. And I said, we'd like to run a trail through your property beneath and in sight of your house. Will you agree to this? And you know what she said? Yes, she agreed. Marilyn Wilson, all credit to Marilyn Wilson. Not a lot of people would have agreed to what we proposed, but Marilyn did.
And Wilson's Grove, Esperanza, is for me, one of the most majestic trails really within East Hampton's Northwest Woods. I mean, it is just beautiful. And perish the thought, Rick, if Marilyn Wilson, thanks to your incredible negotiating skills apparently, if Marilyn Wilson didn't agree to this, because it also,
thankfully she owned that property.
Right, thankfully she owned it.
As you indicated, she was a conservationist, and so that in and of itself made it, a negotiation that was probably much, won't say easy, but easier to achieve.
I mean, Wilson's Grove could have been a subdivision. Honestly, right?
Not under Maryland. I mean, Maryland.
No, but without if it wasn't Maryland's under Maryland's ownership,
that's right.
Is what I mean.
But. So I did name the forest there in her honor. That Wilson's Grove was my name, and it comes from Marilyn Wilson.
And well deserved. I
Yeah.
mean, my gosh.
Well, we have talked about this time out here, Irwin and I, on previous podcasts, that crucial time frame in the 80s where the town had the foresight and the ability, and people came together to purchase. I mean, this is pre-community preservation fund, and yet these purchases were made, with taxpayer money directly, like referendum wise, wasn't it? So how crucial
Yeah.
it was that the community did agree that these purchases were important. I mean,
That's
if
right.
they were going even back to the 70s, that was pretty visionary.
Yeah, I mean,
That the early 80s was a very crucial time in the history
Yeah.
of East Hampton town. And you probably know. And most people that live out here now today, they don't go back that far. Even then, they may not know about it. But the town board in the early 1980s, I won't name any party names here, but a rogue town board abolished the town planning department in
Mhm,
1982, and it initiated essentially the modern East Hampton because the blowback from that was extraordinary. It changed the political trajectory of the town, and as Esperanza said, led to acquisition of things like the Grace Estate, Hither Woods. Ultimately, although the state bought it, we didn't buy it. Barcelona Neck.
mhm.
Those were the crucial. Those were all on the chopping block in 1982, 1983. All those
Yep.
properties.
Yep. And we've talked about that with Ben regarding Ben Heller,
Right.
and
Yep.
it really is. It's an amazing. It's sort of, we fast forward to now and we think that
It's always been like this. It
well,
has
yes,
been.
yes, and also that people, take it for granted in many ways. You always think like, oh, you're looking at a piece, patch of land, and you say, oh, that must be preserved because we've become accustomed to having these open spaces, and yet a lot of this land is still privately owned and could be subdivided.
And that's a really good segue to where I want to start going here with Rick. We go along chronologically. We just touched on the early 80s. It's critical change. How did your work, we should also mention Rick's work and his background as an attorney specializing in zoning matters. All of this has been so important to the ability to do what Rick has done within the Trails Network itself. But as time went on, to your point, Rick, I'm going to make the educated guess that the challenges in terms of creating new trails, getting easements and whatever, the trajectory of the challenges you were facing increased as well. Is it fair to say that?
There was a lot to do. I don't know. I'll say that the challenges increased.
In terms of development and everything else you were
Well,
battling?
let me tell you something that, and I'm sort of blowing my own horn a little bit on this, but this was a little known and not understood, not known element of what happened, helped trails in East Hampton. I was hired to work for the town as a deputy town attorney and with responsible for the planning board and zoning board. And I started on February 27th, 1989.
By the way, Esperanza, Rick's got a mind like a steel trap. I mean, these dates he's pulling out.
I always remember the
perceiving
date I
that.
started. I can't tell you what date I ended. I know it was May of 2008 when I left the town. But I know when I was hired, February 27th, 1989. As the planning board attorney, so I was the planning board attorney until almost to my end my tenure, planning board attorney through 2001, I believe. And there were subdivisions in those days. There were still subdivisions. There was still stuff to be developed, even while the town was gradually moving towards, the CPF fund, which was only enacted in 1998. The first monies came out of that in 1999. The town would, when necessary, do bonds. In other words, there would be referenda, as Esperanza mentioned. In the 1980s and most of the 1990s, if the town wanted to buy property, it would put a bonding referendum on the ballot in November. And in the town of East Hampton, unlike the village, I will point out, none of them were ever defeated. Every bonding referendum in the town for open space passed. So, but when I was the planning board attorney, I obviously worked closely with the planning department, and we would have subdivisions that came in. Hans Creek Hollow, the Van Scoy property in Northwest, tons of others. I not only knew what trails were there, I also had in mind what the projected route was, okay, or what trails we would want in that area. So I would feed that information to the planning department and then the planning board. And so I think my presence, it helped to create a cohesive network. I should also mention now, because we start to move into the Pomnock Path in the early 1990s, another thing that people don't know how it happened. The Pomnock Path in East Hampton started with a phone call to me from a guy named Ray Corwin. Maybe you remember the name, maybe you don't. Ray Corwin was the first head after the state, created the Long Island Pine Barrens region and the Pine Barrens Commission and all this stuff to preserve the Long Island Pine Barrens, primarily west of the Shinnecock Canal. Ray Corwin, who had worked for the Suffolk County Water Authority, became the first executive director of the Pine Barrens Commission. Unfortunately, he passed away shockingly and unexpectedly about 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. Very surprisingly. But Ray, he was a board member of the Long Island Greenbelt Trail Conference. He was the head of the Pine Barrens Commission. He called me one day, this is early 1990s, or one evening. He said, Rick, we're thinking about, because they were working on the Pine Barrens Trail, which ran from Rocky Point in Brookhaven Town to basically the Shinnecock Canal, or close to the Shinnecock Canal. He said, Rick, what's the chances we could put a trail that would go all the way to Montauk Point? Now, we didn't have a name yet for the trail. That'll come later. And my initial reaction to him was, well, I think we could do it Northwest Woods, and we might have preserved land in the Stony Hill area at some point, although that wasn't yet preserved land, but we thought maybe the DeQuavises would preserve that land, which they did. Mm-hmm. And of course, once you hit Napeague and Montauk, there was lots of parkland. But I said, I don't see how you can get a trail from Northwest Woods over to Amagansett without road walking. I don't see the point of it. A trail on the roads is no good. But he triggered me to start thinking about a route. And I started to figure out a route. And by the way, the route that we currently take when you cross over through Harbor Road, we go on a trusty road called Cross Highway, or begins at Carlsruhe Cross Highway. That was Kathy Lester's idea. I knew Kathy was later town supervisor. She'd been actively involved in the Northwest Alliance. She knew about that trusty road. And when she originally told it to me, I don't know if it'll work. We had to go around the south end of Sokides Creek. We didn't have the Tambar Creek Bridge initially. So we had to come out on Sokides Road to walk over to Three Mile Road and then walk north on Three Mile Road. So the route today is much, much more direct and involves much less road walking. But Ray Corwin was the first one to bring that up. And I initially was skeptical of it. And then I thought more about it and began to look at what the possibilities were. And as we know, in 1998, the Pomnock Path was completed in East Hampton Town.
And the name, Pomnock?
My name. So there was a meeting again in the early 1990s. I have to see if I can find this in the Long Island Greenbelt's footnotes newsletter. The only place I may be able to find it, unless there's someone still alive like Dave Wilcox in Southampton who can give me the date. But we had an organizational meeting with Long Island Greenbelt Trail Conference, East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, and the Southampton Trails Preservation Society. Dave Dayton would definitely have been at that meeting. And we met in the Southampton Town Hall planning department offices. We had a big room, and we all met there to plan out how we would plan for the creation of the Pomnock Path east of the Shinnecock Canal. And we were told to come with some names or something like that, because we wanted to have a name with it. So I came and I had two names that I proposed. One was the Sunrise Trail, but the other one, which is the one that I favored, was the Pomnock Path. And it was voted the Pomnock Path.
And Pomnock is an indigenous name?
Yeah, so Pomnock Path, the Walt Whitman, the fish-shaped Pomnock, it was purportedly the Indian name for Long Island, whether or not that's actually true. But it was an Indian name. It had connections to Long Island. Maybe it referred to the island as a whole. Walt Whitman had, mentioned it in Leaves of Grass. And the path was alliterative. So that was my name. The other name, as I said, Sunrise Trail was a backup, but everyone really jumped right on Pomnock. So that name was adopted at this meeting in the Southampton Town Hall in circa 1993.
Wow.
So you never considered calling it Talk House Trail or something like that?
Well, no, yes, we have to talk. Yes, that was Talk House Path. And we actually used the name Talk House Path. The Stephen Talk House Path is part of the Pomnock Path. That's in Hither Hill State Park, and it runs from Napping Harbor Road until it follows the single track that we created to get over to the old North Road.
You know these trails like the back of your
It's
hand,
I'm
assuming.
Esperanza. I'm telling you, I talk up Rick wherever I go. I know there is no such thing anymore as an encyclopedia like there was in our day, but I'm telling you, this guy, he is a walking encyclopedia of the not only of East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, but of the Trails Network himself. And just I can't emphasize this enough to our audience, just in terms of conceptualizing this, executing it, and a legal background. It was the perfect storm in a good way,
Right.
right? In terms of putting all this kind of thing together.
But in terms of knowing the trails, you have to understand this all, my knowledge base developed organically.
Yes.
All of the trails that we've created ourselves, we only create single track trails, right? We only, we cut 4-foot wide footpaths is what we
Right.
do today.
Mhm.
So all of those, beginning with the Northwest Path and expanding to, the continuation of the Palmanock Path and many, many subsidiary trails, I've been around for all of that
Yeah.
because, before 1982, as I said, all there were woods roads. Nobody had cut a single trail. Well, by the way, I want to give credit where it's due. A lot of people have been involved in the design of our trails, but I have to mention Mike Bottini again because
Yeah.
he was a lot of the trail design, the Stephen Elcast Path, for example, in Hither Hill State Park, or the trail on the south side of the Montauk Highway in Nappy, which I call the Mike Bottini Loop. Probably the two main designers of trails, routing of trails, were probably me and Mike.
Mike is who, if you can just
Mike Bottini, well, he worked in those days at the group, was then called the Group for the South Fork. That's
Right.
when I came, he came out here to work for the Group for the South Fork,
which today is the group for the East End, correct?
which is today the Group for the East End. He's still involved in environmental, matters, mostly as a researcher, and he works for a CTUC Environmental, what's their name? CTUC Environmental.
That is CTUC Environmental, yes.
Yes.
That's the name. And also, Rick, he's we should also mention about Mike, the author of 2 amazing books about the trail system on the east end of Long Island, and also about the waterways of eastern Long Island.
Mike has published a trails guide to East End trails, as well as a waterways guide for kayaking.
I'll give you a little anecdote, Esperanza. One time, the Mike Bottini book about trails. I have a copy of this book. It is dog-eared, written on, highlighted, like you can't imagine. And I once pulled into the recycling center on Springs Fireplace Road to throw away my recycles and everything else. And who pulls next to me? I think I just got off of a trail walk, and the book was next to me on the seat. And Mike pulls in right next to me randomly and says, "Hey, nice book." I said, "Yeah, now you can sign it." So Mike actually signed that book for me. Every time I see Mike to this day, I say, "Remember when you signed that book for me?" We have to start closing this episode out, Rick, and we're going to start wrapping it up and bringing it into the present day. And we should also mention just briefly, East Hampton Trails Preservation Society actually had a big celebration a couple of years back of the Palmanock Path that our board orchestrated, and Rick played an enormous part of it. We had the Hampton Hopper, big groups to hike the entire Trails Network. And one of our board members, I should also mention, Peter Coy, just published something in East Hampton Star, how he actually over time traversed the entire Palmanock Path from Rocky Point to Montauk. So shout out to Peter as well. But bringing it into present day and how EHTPS has really evolved over time. Rick, you have an interest in local history. You've been working on a book about local history. I love that storyline, Esperanza, guy from the Bronx writing a history of this. We love that, right? That's just so special.
By the way, it is an encyclopedia.
And it is an encyclopedia. Rick, is it fair to say this is like a passion project for you, really, right?
Oh,
I mean, just your total love of community, love of the area, and you're really putting a lot into it, right? I mean, like the research and everything. I mean, it's
ridiculous amount.
Yeah. I mean, and Rick should also tell us, Esperanza, he's very modest. He doesn't really bring this stuff up, but I mean, he's got an enormous photograph collection also of all sorts of things. If you want to share that with us on the East End, Rick, about you've taken on the trails and everything else, right?
Actually, we got to get some of these up on the East Hampton Trails website, but haven't had time. I have tons of hundreds, thousands of pictures of
Yeah,
trails.
we actually need to hire an employee to do that. So
I consider the digital collection, Long Island, the library, East Hampton Library, and their digital collection.
Maybe
that
word should line up.
that
Well,
is
they'll
good.
digitize and then return them to you, so it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, they're all digital. I mean, it's all electronic.
Yeah.
Oh, you already have them digital.
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
thinking you're going back to the 80s, pre.
I had a few that were on film in the early 1980s.
Those are the ones that interest me, right?
Yeah. Well, in the woods, it's interesting because you can see even in the early 1980s there were some vegetative differences.
For sure, I'm sure. Yeah.
Cleared land.
But
I mean, I know we're going to be closing, but I am remembering just in my own mind's eye, and you see nowadays with the decimation of the pines through the pine beetle, but I remember the Napeague stretch and so many other places having much lower vegetation or
Yes.
none.
Yes.
And so
you can see the ocean dunes on the Montauk Highway.
Exactly.
And you'll be able to see them again for all the wrong reasons.
Correct. Through the dead wood. But that's something that I always think about, that the evolution of the natural world here. People, as you say, don't have the longer history usually, not all. But I remember that, and you remember that, and it's really striking now to be able to see the dunes, like you're saying, where you've got undergrowth that is invasive or things like that have come over time.
to close this out, Esperanza, the East Hampton Trails Preservation Society is really still going strong, and there still really is, amidst all of the changes, people are really passionate, not only about our trails network, which is extraordinary, despite all the challenges, the mad money, the preservation that needs to be done, but just the people that are so committed to it, like Rick, like the board members of this organization, and really like the membership.
How many members are there?
We have, in round numbers, I'm going to say we have about 550 members. Member families, so multiply that by.
We have to tell people that members are the ones that help to clear trails and maintain them. Correct.
We are member based, and a very small membership fee really does support all of our activities, and but it's 46 years strong, and really we're just very forward thinking. It's a great group on this board. We have a fantastic board, a really a great membership, and it's just people just so committed. And I think Rick is a prime example. This isn't hyperbole to say this, Rick. This is a legacy that you're leaving here. That I'm not stroking Rick's very fragile male ego. We all have fragile male egos. I'm not doing that here. But honestly, these contributions that Rick Whalen has made really over the course of a lifetime, these contributions are going to go on way beyond our time, Rick's time here. And honestly, it's an amazing legacy that I'm just going to say it. This town, this community owes a debt of gratitude to Rick Whalen.
Well, you know what I put first in my legacy, Irwin?
Yes.
And this is with me and Tom Rule. We preserved Hither Woods.
That's
the thing I'm proudest of.
Amen to that. And believe me, Hither Woods could be a podcast in and of itself. But yes,
for sure.
Yes, but say that one more time, Rick, for our audience, because it's a great way to close this podcast.
I'm proudest of the effort that I and Tom Rule initiated and that we waged with many other people that assisted, of course, in the early 1980s, between 1982 and 1988, to preserve Hither Woods, the land east of Hither Hill State Park that was up for development in the early 80s. And we basically preserved, we did preserve 100% of what we aimed to preserve.
I mean, perish the thought, Esperanza, if that was developed. I mean, it's unimaginable.
Owls or whatever else,
Unimaginable. Rick Whalen, we cannot thank you enough. I hope you had as good a time talking to us as we had talking to you.
This was fun. Thank you.
I'm glad. And Esperanza, as always, a pleasure.
Likewise, Irwin, until next time.
Until next time. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.